Hello and welcome back to another experimental soup. In today's episode, my introduction will be necessarily brief, for today's experiment was fairly lengthy. We were attempting to make some simple ink based on some fairly basic ingredients, but also a fairly old and very simple recipe. If you want to give this a go, you will require the following. First of all, an egg, or rather some egg white. Next, some honey. You'll need some soot or some very finely ground charcoal, a bowl in which to mix these things, possibly a small whisk to help, and also a feather quill, or a feather from which you might cut a quill. Now, this ink recipe is based on two things. First of all, the fact that very early medieval ink has been analysed and shown to contain quite a lot of soot. So this is an attempt to understand how that soot gets into the ink and how it can become a usable colour. But also as well, it's a recipe that I've chosen very deliberately because it's one that you might be able to do at home fairly easily. So please do see if you can follow along. So if you've got those things together, let's dive in. Okay, so these are the ingredients that you'll need to make this old ink, possibly even Saxon ink. Here we have some egg whites. You retrieve the yolk from the egg, cast that aside, or maybe even use that in baking, and you keep the egg whites in a glass. Here we have some honey. I've got some honey in a squeezable bottle, just for convenience really, but actually you could use honey from a pot with a spoon. We have an empty bowl for mixing the ink. And we also have some soot, retrieved actually from a friend just up the road at the end of our street. They have a lovely soot-filled fireplace, so he retrieved some for me. Now, this has actually been very finely ground. I had to pass this through a pestle and mortar kind of situation a couple of times just to get it down to a very fine powder-like consistency. And also as well, I'm going to be using a whisk for the mixing. You don't have to use a whisk, but I've found a whisk just a bit more expedient, to be honest. Now, the recipe is actually really rather vague. It simply says that you take a quantity of soot and albumin and mix them together and then add some honey. Now, in previous experiments with making this, what I've done actually is basically just taken the egg white straight away, poured a load of soot in and just started whisking. And what you end up what we end up with there is a rather horrible concoction where all the soot just sort of floats, not even in solution, just sort of floats amongst the gelatinous air-filled egg whites, and it also smells horrible, so we won't be doing that. The best way that I've come across of mixing these ingredients together is to start with the dry and then bit by bit add the wet ingredients. That is, start with the soot and bit by bit add the egg white and then some honey. So let's start like that, shall we? So here we go. Tip in a little bit of soot, not too much, just to begin with, and then a little bit of the egg white. There we go. And then start to mix. Now, this isn't the most enthralling thing to watch, so I may well speed up this footage and then slow down whenever I do something in addition. So yeah, let's see how this goes. Now, you shouldn't be too scared if at first you're getting this kind of situation where the soot and the egg white aren't mixing uniformly. You've got to remember the soot is not soluble, so it's not going to disappear into the egg white. And you will get, for example, here I've got some air bubbles appearing. Just continue to mix through that. Okay, so now that that's mixed somewhat, what I'm going to do is add a little bit more soot, just because I want a slightly larger quantity of ink than this small amount. A bit more soot and a bit more egg white. Oh, that was quite a lot. We shall see how this goes. Now, as I was saying before, this isn't an exact science, because unfortunately lots of the egg white came out at once there, and I've only got so much soot. I'll be adding all the rest of my soot to this concoction in the hope that we can rescue it. So now you've got it to this sort of state where the soot is sitting in a form of solution, but it's not completely uniform throughout the egg white. Now this is the stage when you've got this sort of situation where it's quite blobby, but hopefully though not too many blobs of soot, rather the egg whites are quite blobby. What you need to do now is think about adding the honey. The honey will act to create a smoother paste essentially. It'll encourage the soot to move throughout the honey a little bit more easily. So add a bit of honey. Again, this isn't a precise science. You just need to add a bit at a time. So there's a bit. So yes, the honey isn't really breaking through that consistency just yet. So we need to add a bit more honey to this mixture. Now, the smoother the honey, the better. In my case, my honey isn't the smoothest because it's been in the cupboard for a little while. Now, I think at this stage, it's a little bit thicker, it's a little less globular as well. The honey has helped to make it so that the egg white isn't sort of globulizing. I know that's not a technical term, but you know what I mean. At this stage, it might be an opportunity to actually test this ink out and then see if you need to add anything else to the mixture. So for that, what I've got with me is a trusty quill and also a couple of test pieces of paper. So let's see how this goes, shall we? Now, interestingly enough, actually, quills, real quills, that is, quills in ancient times, didn't necessarily look like this with the feathers on. The images that we have, for example, in the Lindisfarne Gospels are of things which have been trimmed down and also have all the feathers, the plumage removed from the feather. Now, this may well indicate that it's a feather which has been trimmed, or actually that it's simply a reed which is being used. So, funnily enough, not all quills were necessarily feathers, but I quite like a bit of plumage on my quills rather. Hence, I keep them on. Plus, as well, yes, this obviously has been dyed yellow. Anyway, let's give this a go, shall we? Dip it in, scrape off some excess, see how this writes. Hold the quill upright so you don't waste all your ink in one go. No, not quite. Okay, so we need to add just a little bit more honey to the mix. Okay, so let's give this another go, shall we? Dip in the feather quill, and try and write hello again. It's getting there, slightly better consistency. Add a little bit more honey. Basically what you're after is not so much ink as we might recognise it, but rather a sort of paste. So yeah, be prepared to add more and more honey, but as with any chemical or baking endeavour, you can always add more, you cannot take it out, so add it bit by bit. Now that's looking quite good actually, so let's give this one more try. Dip it in, scrape off some excess. Do you know, I think it might be the feather that I've chosen. I shall pick another one. Let's try this feather. This one's green, of course, naturally. Another try. Now I have to say, that's looking a bit better than it has done previously. Now, when I do write with quills normally, I just use modern ink, and that flows beautifully. This stuff, this recipe, I suspect because you don't get precise values in it, precise directions, it is very much open to a bit of experimentation and interpretation. But I think we've got something that looks a bit like ink. Try and write something else, shall we? Now, through experimenting with this ink over the past few weeks, actually, the best way I've found to get this concoction to spread evenly over the page is to also make use of a little bit of water. So what we do is we have the water to one side here, and basically what it helps this concoction here to not clog up the quill, because obviously there's lots of honey crystals in there, there's soot, there's all sorts of muck, and also as well it helps actually the colour to spread through the water a little bit and through the quill on the page. So this is the way that I've come across as best as doing it. So let's try and write something, shall we? So start with, sure you can guess what it is. Archaeo soup. So that's not too bad. It's a little bit pale, but this really comes down to experimenting with the different quantities of ingredients. Let's try writing something else, shall we? And one more thing. Mrs. Soup, who incidentally may not be all that happy that I've spilled soot on her nice clean tablecloth here. That may be changed by the time she gets home. But there we have it, the beginnings of some ink. Now this is, as the title states, experimental soup. So I'm still getting to grips with this recipe because actually it isn't a recipe per se, rather it's a series of reminders for someone who already knows how to make this ink. But as far as in my experience so far, if you get smooth honey and a little bit of egg white at a time, then it should go well. Unfortunately today, all the egg white went in one go, possibly because I'm trying to do this through a camera viewfinder, and therefore I think that might have actually slightly messed up the balance of ingredients. Unfortunately, that was all my sut as well for the day. However, this is a very good start. Yesterday, actually, I tried out this recipe one final time before shooting today, without any use of water, in fact. And the results were very similar to what you've seen written here. So it's possible to get the balance just right. But I suppose what this really highlights is that the people who made this ink routinely, and the people who used it routinely, first of all, yes, of course they knew what they were doing because they did it all the time, but also they were experts in terms of the combinations and the chemistry involved, which I am not, because I'm a meagre modern man. So there you have it, a fairly simple recipe and a fairly simple ink. Now, there are other recipes for ink. There are far more complicated recipes for ink, which I may well revisit in later episodes in this series. But as I say, I really wanted to do something which everyone could have a go at home and try and make some form of ancient ink. So here's what I wrote just on the table, just downstairs. I'm quite happy with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts about making ancient ink and how people went about harvesting the pigments and getting a uniform colour and a decent hue to the ink as well. So if you have heard anything, if you have any tips or insights, please do comment below. But ultimately, today's experiment was one which I hope people at home will be able to dive into and have a bit of a go themselves. So there you go. Until next time, bye bye.